Okay, then good afternoon everybody. Welcome to our lecture, Development of Electronic Systems. Today we have a special guest, Mr. Moritz Pichler. So I'd like to give you a short introduction. Mr. Pichler has been working in different fields of electrical engineering and static and sustainability consulting. He holds a master's degree from Graz University of Technology, a master's degree of law from the University of Vienna, and an MBA from Italian University in the United States. Currently, Mr. Pichler leads the consulting branch of a company called Saubermacher, a major waste disposal company not that far away from here. And he provides quite a lot of trainings and consulting on the topic of sustainability. And today we have the great pleasure to have him here talking about the development of electronic systems and about the circular design. So Mr. Pichler, thank you very much for coming. It's a great pleasure having you here. Now the stage is yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for the introduction. So my name is Moritz. Today we'll talk about circular economy, sustainability, a lot of different strategic topics that feed into those two big keywords. Little bit of legal system, legal boundary conditions implied upon us from the European Union, but very much focused on how should companies, from a strategic point of view, deliver products that are sustainable, that fulfill a lot of those green criteria that we're all talking about, and how can we all really go into this one sustainable direction, fulfilling really all different aspects, different needs from customer perspective, from legal perspective, from technical perspective. This is very complex, you will see that. We'll have a very short introduction to the topic. We'll talk quickly about ESG. So what is ESG? Who of you knows ESG, what ESG is? ESG, 1, 2, ESG? No? Okay, so that's important. We'll talk about green strategy development because it really doesn't matter what jobs you're doing after university or right now, but you're all part of somehow the strategic work environment in your company and or even in the country where you are, for example, working at the university level. You have to understand what is the big picture, what is the big strategy. And only if we understand that, then we know how to deal with that in actually what we are doing. We'll talk about the 9R strategies. Who knows what these are? No? Well, that's cool. And then we'll talk about circular economy in the electronics industry. So we'll go from really high level a little bit more into the details. But please don't ask me the technical details because I'm not, for example, like Professor Deutschmann, I'm not an expert in electronics, really, and not in electronics manufacturing, but really in sustainability from a strategic point of view. That's why I'm stressing the term strategy so much today. We have to get a big picture. Yeah? If we understand the big picture, then we can go into the details everywhere and we can shape R&D projects to go into the details. But unless we don't know what strategy is, it's very difficult. Let's get the introduction done. What do you think when we're talking about recycling of electronic appliances? How does it smell? What do you think? It smells like strawberries. Why do you think is that the case? That's why. You know what that is? Yes. What are the tools you need for that? For recycling that? It's a very down-to-earth business. These are the tools. And how do you do it? You hit it once in the right spot and then it falls apart. This is the ideal world. But this is recycling. Yeah? This is recycling of electronics today. And this is really the hardcore stuff. Yeah? So we have to get out the battery, for example. We have to get out major components that can then be treated and separated in different channels. But first of all, we have to somehow get to the part where the battery is out. Because what happens if the battery is not out and we put it into a shredder or something? Well, the whole thing burns up, right? So that's it. Why is it so brutal? That's the reason. Because it costs a lot of money. It's difficult to do, actually, if we want to do it in a very good quality. Recycling is not, let's say, it's not medical quality. It's not like in a clean room, for example. This is really, you will get nasty stuff, and it's very, very difficult. But that's why it's brutal, because it costs a lot of time and costs a lot of money if you do it properly. And why is waste so important for Europe? What do you think? Why don't we ship waste anymore to China?
Maybe because of the resources, we don't want to use them.
Again, that's the reason. Because most of the major resources are somewhere here in Asia, are somewhere here in Africa, are somewhere in North America, but in Europe, in Central Europe, we have nothing, pretty much. We have some small bits and pieces here and there, but in the grand scheme of things, Europe is really worthless when it comes to raw materials. So that means once we get stuff into our countries, let's say in the form of batteries, we would really be stupid to send those batteries back to somewhere else, to Africa or to Asia or wherever, and not use the lithium, for example, that's inside the batteries, because we simply do not have lithium in large quantities in Europe. And if we want to build an economy for that, we need to keep those resources in Europe. And no worry, I'm not going into details there. This is just, as I said, the grand scheme. ESG. ESG is a key phrase in the sustainability industry, I would even say. And there is really a lot of money buried in all those sustainability approaches that we're talking about today. ESG is really the key. ESG says we're talking about the environment, for example, carbon emissions. So what are the companies doing to the environment? What are the effects of company operations on the environment, on the people? How does it work out? Waste management is a big factor here. So here, this is where my company is actually working in. Because we know that only then when we get all the resources out of the waste, so we don't have to put anything into landfill. This would be the ideal situation. Landfill is Deponie in German. So only if we don't put anything in the landfill anymore, then we get everything that's buried in the waste out of it. And this is let's say it's a vision that's called zero waste. So we don't actually produce waste anymore, but we produce raw materials, secondary raw materials from waste. We produce fuel from waste, so we can, for example, operate the cement industry, or we can produce thermal heat. But we don't put anything into landfill anymore. Environmental aspects, this is the E in ESG. The second one, S, is social. So how do we deal with the people around our companies? One big point there is, for example, consumer protection. So how do we make sure that the consumers of our products can have a healthy life and are not somehow impeded by our products? Now it's also related to community engagement. So for example, in Austria, we have a lot of voluntary services, the fire brigades. On the countryside, for example, the Freiwillige Feuerwehren. They are only there if the people have the possibility to go there and to the firefighting operations. If, for example, a company allows their employees to take part of those operations, then this is really a big part in the community engagement, and this is a big factor in the S discipline of ESG. And the G, this is a bit, let's say, far away from technical point of view. This is governance. This is how a company is run, how it's managed, how the risk procedures work. this is very much related to financial services, financial topics. But ESG, all those three topics together, this is typically what we're talking about when we're talking about sustainability today. So if a company is sustainable, then it does no harm to the environment, it does no harm to the people, and it uses its resources, its money in a fair and good way. Let's dive a little bit deeper into the environment aspect. And these slides are really the only slides where I have full text. The other slides will be like really picture loaded. But this is important in the beginning just to make sure we're on the same page with regards to these topics. The most important aspect, I think, is carbon emissions reduction. This is really what people are talking about when they say we want to operate in a green environment. We want to have the net zero, we want to have carbon neutrality. This is all related to carbon emissions reduction. So we want to go to zero with our net reductions in a certain time frame, 2040, 2050, whatever it is. Hopefully it works out, because this is the only thing that will keep us from heating up our planet, in simple terms. One point to achieve that is energy efficiency. So going from 7 nanometer to 5 nanometer to 3 nanometer, these are all initiatives to improve the energy efficiency, many other things as well. Waste management, make sure that we produce zero waste, make sure that we can use the raw materials a second time, a third time, have even ways, and we'll come later to that, have even ways to use whole components, equipment a second, a third time. For example, like Apple does it today, they buy back old products, used products, they refurbish them and sell them again on other markets. So these are the main topics here. Social, one big important thing about social is DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion. This has a lot to do with human rights, equity of genders and non-discriminating things. Health and safety, very important. Health and safety in Europe is not of big concern, but if you go to other countries, this is really a thing. And if it's not more than just putting an orange vest on somebody that's working on a construction site, but it can save lives. Yeah. In Europe, I think it's quite well developed. In other countries, not so much. Really, really very important. And it's not difficult to do. It's very sustainable to keep people in the company and not let them die on site. Human rights and fair labor practices, also very important. For example, when you think about child labor, in Austria, not so much of a topic, but in other countries, we don't know. And the point here is the European Union is taking a lot of steps at the moment in order to make sure that the complete supply chain from an Austrian company, for example, back to all the sources where it gets its resources from, its components, whatever it is, has to be somehow documented in order to make sure that no child labor, for example, occurs in that value chain. So this is a very important topic also for legislation, and makes also working in Europe a little difficult because you have to do a lot of reporting. But it makes sure that we stay sustainable in what we're doing. And then governance, I think, again, this is the least important one for us here in this round. But the point is we have to make sure that the good ideas we have and the good rules that we establish for a company or for an organization with regards to sustainability are really followed and are really implemented in the company, and business is done accordingly. Now comes the next big term. The next big term is circular economy. Who knows what circular economy is? Okay. Circular economy is especially for everything that's linked to manufacturing, production companies, like laptop production or whatever it is, car production, car manufacturing. Circular economy wants to make sure that we follow several rules that make our products and the way we operate more sustainable. So for example, with regards to the environmental aspect, we want to make sure that our resources are used efficiently. We want to reduce waste as much as possible. For example, I have one of my major clients now is in the brick and mortar business, so they're actually building bricks for houses. They want to make sure that their waste is reduced every year by 5%. It's not a big number, but it's something. In 3 or 4 years, they're down by 20% with their waste. And typically, when you look at their waste, it's like per plant between 1,000 and 10,000 tons a year. If you can reduce that by significant amounts, this helps us preserving the environment and producing better products with less effects on the people around it and with less effects on the environment. So reduction of waste is really a big point here. Carbon emission, we've already been talking about that. Sustainable product design, will come later to that. Social aspects, we want to have good jobs, right? You're studying because you want to have good jobs. Point is, and this is a bit where it gets tricky, we need to have a working economy in order to produce good jobs. But we have to keep this economy by means of sustainability in order to keep those jobs. Because otherwise we will destroy somehow and after a certain time the surroundings and our basis for living. And our health will degrade. And actually all the foundations that we have for doing the business will somehow erode. And that's why it's so important to have in mind that first of all we have to do a good job, but then we have certain basis of good basis of operations, lots of funding, good quality of production, good health and safety situation. Then we can become sustainable to keep that standard and to keep what we're doing in the same level. And we'll come later to some really good examples. I will give you some really nice pictures what that means. But it's important to keep that in mind that social aspects are really important. Governance aspects, for example, we have to know transparent resource use. We have to know how much resources do we need to do what. Like 10, 20 years ago, companies just bought raw materials, and when they were depleted, they bought new resource materials, and nobody cared how much it was actually. Until when someone asked, how much does it cost? Yeah, okay. So money became an issue like 20 years ago, but now we're looking at the topic from first of all, resource efficiency, so how many resources do we actually need, and what emissions do those resources produce when we use them. So this is the two big things, cost and emissions of, for example, use of resources. Now this is the difficult part. Now we come to the, let's say, little more relaxed part. The EU has put out the Green Deal, and the Green Deal says that we want to be climate neutral by 2050 here in Europe. And the EU has a lot of good ideas how to implement that. For example, the Green Deal Industrial Plan and an initiative that is called Repower EU, where we want to give sustainable energy to the market with a fair amount. The point is, and this is the next slide, the point is the EU has a lot of different regulations in place and is putting out more regulations every week. And these regulations are very difficult for many companies to follow. So this is really the big problem we have. Even if our companies try to be as sustainable as possible, it's very difficult for them, on the other hand, to fulfill all the needs and regulations from European perspective. And I just want to give examples for different regulations that are in place at the moment. So if we look at the climate perspective, we have the European Green Deal. This is the strategic plan of the European Union. And then we have the EU climate law, which defines, for example, where we have to reduce our emissions in what time frame. We have also the emissions trading system. So we have, for example, if we're producing stuff in one country and selling it to another country, then we have to consider all the emissions that are generated in that country in order to make sure that we are not exporting emissions to areas where they are not controlled. So the EU really wants to make sure that emissions related to manufacturing are somehow registered, and we have to pay for that in order to motivate the companies to reduce them. We have the EU taxonomy regulation. Who of you heard about that? Probably nobody. EU taxonomy regulation is really big in the business at the moment. This defines, and nearly every company has to define what is the company doing, so the purpose of the company, and how does it affect the environment. So this is really some big topic, because your financial conditions that you will get from a bank, for example, for a loan, will depend highly on how you're rated by this taxonomy regulation. That's why it's called taxonomy, because you're somehow put into categories, and there are categories which will receive better conditions, and there are categories with less good conditions when financing their operations. And this is there in place to motivate, again, companies to do more sustainable stuff. The Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive is the next one. No, I guess it's not so common here, right? Because this is, again, a rather business-related topic. It's not so technical. Companies have to report how they're doing in certain aspects of sustainability. They have to report every year somehow around 1,000 data points publicly. What they're doing, for example, how much waste are they producing? How much dangerous waste are they producing? How much water are they consuming? What emissions, of course, are they producing? And so on. So a lot of different topics, 1,000 plus data points every year. This is really impacting operations in a negative way, because it's a lot of effort. We have to say that. It's very difficult for companies nowadays. The environment, for example, the Water Framework Directive, very interesting. Water Framework Directive says that you can't simply decrease the quality of a water body, so for example of a river. This is the reason why it's very difficult to build new hydropower plants. They would be sustainable in certain ways because they are kind of green energy, but it's simply not possible to build them because they would degrade the quality of a river, for example, and that's why it's practically not possible to build hydropower plants in many locations. And I think the market for hydropower plants has been going down in Europe in the last 10 years or so just because of that. There are a lot of rehabilitations ongoing, so repowering. Sites are increasing their output power, but this is existing power plants. It's practically impossible to build new ones. We have in Europe the European Pillar of Social Rights. So there is one charter that says what social rights are kind of the standard in Europe. Good, that's good to have. And then we have the codes or the laws with regards to supply chain. Two are interesting. The deforestation regulation is interesting because you have to make sure in the future that your products do not reduce the area of forest in an undue way. And this goes so far as to, for example, importers of car tires have to make sure that the caoutchouc going into the car tires doesn't really affect the forest around it. Or the EU supply chain law, which is a good thing, but we have to make sure in every company that every component and every raw material that's going into the company from outside has to comply with the, for example, labor laws that are applied in the European Union. So which is again very difficult for many companies. And then we have circular economy. One big thing is the Waste Framework Directive. We'll come immediately to that. This is very interesting because it says we want to recycle as much as possible and we have specific targets, and it also gives a prioritization of different treatments for recycling initiatives. That was the hard part. Do you have any questions so far? Now comes the fun part. Green strategy development. Strategy development, I think, is really important because every organization has certain big goals, and only when we know what these goals are, then we can work so these goals become reality. And in companies especially, the strategy is actually a part of the C-level, so the Vorstand, the CEO, the COO level people in the company, they are dealing with strategy. And nobody else does, actually. But this is wrong. Everybody should be dealing with strategy. At least we should know how the strategy is designed, what are the key factors of the strategy, and we have to know what we can do as individuals to fulfill this strategy. So the strategy is the big plan, and if you look, for example, at a chess game, the strategy is to win. You have to use all the figures to win, but if you're one individual piece, then you have to know what is your job, how to do it properly. And that's why I think it is very, very important to talk about key components of strategy development. You will understand immediately why this is really cool. This is non-technical. There is no Maxwell equations or whatever. Yeah? But when I was studying electrical engineering here like 20 years ago, nobody was talking about that. But it's so damn important, especially if you're working in corporate environments. Top line and bottom line. We always have to think about two different aspects in a company. The top line is related to the market, to products that are sold to clients, and the bottom line is in the company is where costs are produced. So for example, in manufacturing. Manufacturing cars costs money, and selling cars to people gets the company money, so the sales process is the top line and the manufacturing process is the bottom line. Customer centricity, the next point, is very, 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 very important. Bernd and I have just been discussing our adventures with electric cars, and one of the reasons why European car manufacturers are really bad at manufacturing cars is because they do not understand what people want from electric cars. Electric cars from Europe are not designed for customers. They're designed for the companies who sell them, and not even then. One example, I know one brand of electric cars that delivers nearly brand new electric cars with like 30,000 kilometers to our plants because one cell in the huge pile of cells, battery cells that's in the car is defect. And you can scrap the whole car. And this is not in the interest of the consumer or the customer. That's why it's so damn important. It doesn't matter what job you have, for example, in designing an electric car. But if a decision is made that if one battery cell is damaged, the whole car has to be destroyed, then this decision is generally wrong, I would say. Because all the resources that went into this car are pretty much lost. So this is why customer centricity is really important. Always think, what does the client want? Is it really what the client needs? This is really important. Many European companies simply forget about it. Apple does not forget about it. Tesla does not forget about it. They do give the people what they want. This is one of their key success factors, actually. If we analyze markets, we look at 3 components. Again, very quickly, we look at our company, what are we doing? We look at the customer, what is the customer asking from us, and what is the competition doing? If we look at those 3 categories, we know pretty much everything. We don't have to go into the details, but we have to look at those 3. We're happy if we know what's going on there. And finally, if you want to take a strategic decision, this is science. And to some people, they get the feeling that strategic decision making is like acting out of the gut, doing what you have a good feeling with. And this is totally wrong. This is science. This is first of all formulating a hypothesis and second testing it. And if the hypothesis is right, then you go in that direction. Now this is really the big picture of how we should treat strategic topics. We should look at the top line and the bottom line. Top line is very much linked to customer centricity. We have to analyze the market, our own company, the customer segment, what do they want, how much can they pay, how often will they buy a new one, etc. And we have to look at the competition, and once we are ready to take the decision, we have to test what we want to do. And you can study this, like it takes you 5 years to learn all of that, yeah? But this is the most important stuff in 3 minutes. Now, if you want to really create value with the circular economy, CE stands for circular economy. If you really want to create value, we have to look at the top line growth, so to sell more, and we have to look at the bottom line growth, so to reduce our costs. What does that mean? Top line, we have to start really with this customer-centric product portfolio. We have to develop products for the customer, not for ourselves. We have to focus on the customer needs. We have to create value with sustainable products, properties. What does that mean? For example, if I drop my bloody phone on the floor and it breaks, there is a lot of resources in it that won't be used anymore. And it costs the customer a lot of money to replace it. If it doesn't break, that's a good thing, and we created value for the customer because he doesn't need to buy a new one. And we have to, and that's important because, again, I mean, it's such an easy example, I'm sorry, but if we look at the European car manufacturers, they simply do not do it. We have to continuously evaluate what people around us are doing. And if somebody is going into one direction very quickly, they can be onto something. There is probably a reason behind it. And the second big part, apart from the product, so apart from this thing here, is the business model. What is the business model? The business model, how do I make money out of this? And the classic is, I sell this to somebody and get 1,000 euros or whatever. But this is really changing right now. This has been changing already with the car manufacturers. Again, it's such a good example. Mercedes, for example, changed from pure sales to product as a service. For example, if you buy a Mercedes, the first 2 years, it can do a lot of fantastic stuff. And after 2 years, they will ask a monthly fee from you in order to keep this stuff going. It's not super sustainable. It doesn't bring you any joy as a customer. Okay, fair enough. But this could be one of the options in the future in order to make sure that people pay for what they're doing with the product. For example, if I don't need this every day, why should I pay once and forever for it? Maybe it's better I pay only every day when I need it for it. Now, a smartphone is difficult because we use it every day, but we can link it to gigabyte. We can link it to number of phone calls. We can link it to duration of phone calls, whatever, yeah? The point is, we want to make sure that people keep our product as long as possible, because then we don't have to build it from scratch anymore. They just keep using it, but we still want to get money out of it. And this is the key aspect. That's why it could be really interesting to pay or to give incentives in case people return their phones for repair, or they want to repair it themselves, which is not really possible today. For some pros it's possible, for me it's not. But this could be actually a business model. So for example, Apple could be cranking out repair kits for broken displays. Why not? They give you the tools, they give you the new display, and you change it yourself. This could be a totally feasible circular economy business model. And then, of course, establish secondary markets for example, for repaired goods or for remanufactured goods. We'll see the differences later. Apple already did that. The reason why so many people in India have iPhones today is because they got the refurbished iPhones from Europe or from North America, which is okay, because we all know that the specification doesn't change that much. Yeah? But they really pulled it off, so this is kind of cool. Bottom line. I said bottom line has to do with operations, with reducing costs. We're looking at, on the one hand, at green operations. So how can we make our operations in the company as sustainable, as environmentally friendly as possible? And then the supply chain, so typically where we're getting components from, how to make that sustainable. I think one of the big things is we have to, in green operations at least, we have to reduce waste. This is really, it's so easy. It's so easy. I'm coming from a disposal company. This is really one of the easiest things. The waste industry in Europe is structured as such. You are producing waste, and you're paying to get that waste removed from you. And then the waste disposal companies, again, tries to get money out of it, selling waste or parts of the waste to others who need that. This is really a cool business model. Yeah? Companies could do that themselves. And if they do it themselves, they have a motivation to become better at doing that. And then they save money, and they save emissions, and they save raw materials, and that's pretty much cool. And then in the supply chain actually is transforming at the moment. With a classic business model, I buy the phone from Apple. The value chain stops when I get the iPhone from Apple. They get the money, I get the phone, and that's it. In the future, when I will return the phone regularly for repair or for, I don't know, improving the screen, improving the chipset, whatever, the business model and the value chain will move on. And also the supply chain, where the resources are coming from and the components, will move on from the point where I just buy the phone. And that's very important for companies to understand. Up to now, everything stopped with the sales of the product, typically. Not for car manufacturers, a bad example in this regard, because they need a lot of maintenance and repair. But for most of the products, it stops when you buy it, the value chain or the supply chain, both. In the future, this will change. Let's have a look into that. Do you know the hierarchy of needs? Okay. This is really a cool concept. This is really a cool concept. This hierarchy of needs is the difference between Apple, of a smartphone manufacturer, being very effective, and others who we really don't know who they are, what they're selling. Because Apple tries to market their components or their products such that they fulfill all of the critical needs. The physiological need is I stay healthy. I remain the person that I am. I keep my situation and my surroundings as I am in a good shape. Safety, of course, I feel safe, I stay safe. Belonging and love, I will be loved by someone. Esteem, so this is how I feel, so how is my Selbstbewusstsein. Very much enforced if I have a valuable product, like for example an iPhone. Apple ticks every box there in this hierarchy of needs. And if we look at some like difficult to cater with political parties, somehow they also tick a lot of those boxes there. What is the individual need? What is the safety need? How much do people belong to each other in their area? So if we try to, for example, compare right-hand parties, left-wing parties, and central parties, they will tick different boxes. And the lower the boxes are, the more important they are for the individual people, which can explain to some extent how we elect who we elect. But this is very important. And if we understand that, we can also understand how people are going to interact with our products and what people are expecting from our products. What properties do they want? Does this phone has to be waterproof? Does it has to be drop resistant? And so on. And everybody would say yes. But how long did it take Apple to produce a waterproof iPhone? I think it was like the 10th generation or something, yeah? But then they tick the box and that's it. Yeah? Now they are very good at it, by the way. And then also, what rights do we give the customers in terms of repair and maintenance? An iPhone, you have no chance at all. Why is it still successful? Because maybe nobody is caring about self-repairing an iPhone. So this is always subject to individual evaluation with regards to the product. Some products, it's very attractive for people to self-repair them, others it's not. But it can be. And in the future, I think, when we look at what's happening today with all these repair cafes, this can be even more important for people, yeah? Because they don't have to have the skills themselves. They go with their broken iPhone to a repair cafe and maybe they find someone who can help them. So industry will be changing there, but just keep in mind this hierarchy of needs. This is really important in order to go through what needs do I want to tick the box with my customers. And many companies don't consider that. And still they're wondering why their product is not successful. So this is really important. And if you consider that, we will have, I call it that, circular client relations. So we'll make sure that the client sticks to the product, and even if the product fails, we'll try to repair the product, and then again sticks to it, because he's happy that the product is repaired. Maybe he even did it himself, and that's even cooler. And the client relation will get stronger and stronger. So this is really a cool effect here. Business model. What was the business model for? Business model was for earning money, right? So we sell something or we deliver a service and you get money for it. The classical value chain is this one. You close the sale, you sign the contract, and the value chain stops. This is the classic, so here this euro sign, this is the classic legacy sales business. In the future, what companies try to achieve is this recurring revenue, what I was talking about before. Why is that? Because they don't have to sell it once and get once money out of it, but they can keep the customer using the product. And then you can stick to one product where already a lot of resources are in it, and you don't have to do it all over again, but just change, for example, certain components that are worth changing. Point is, you have to motivate the people to do that. And this is very difficult. I give you one example. We are working with a manufacturer for traffic lights at the moment. So traffic lights, the huge traffic lights for cities and communities. And they asked us now, how can we improve the sustainability of our traffic light? And I asked them, well, what does the customer do with your traffic light once it's like reached its end of life? Well, turns out the client likes to keep the old traffic light as a spare. So they have a crap pile of spare traffic lights on the yard. Why is that? Because first, nobody is sure if the new one is performing the same way. So people are on the safety side of life. They want to make sure that they have an alternative if the new one is having problems. And second, and that's a big topic in sustainability anyways. Second, a traffic light typically consists of like 90% plastics, polycarbonate, and like 10% valuable components. It's simply difficult and in most cases not worth to recover the product from the client and to do something with it. Because raw materials like plastics are so cheap, it's simply not worth to do it. But in many instances, in many industries, and I think the software IT chip industry is one of them, or those industries are part of it, it really makes sense. Because the things that you crank out of your manufacturing companies, they're really valuable. They have a lot of gold in it, they have a lot of other raw materials. They are worth of recovering. But in other cases, it's not the case. This is always something we have to consider. Does it make sense in the given circumstances or not? Once we achieve that, we have really this loop closed from the supplier to the customer and back again. Then we're talking about a circular business. And just for you, I don't know if you already used it once, the business model canvas, no, not really, so that you've seen it at least once. This is really cool if you want to try out new business models. This is a canvas, it's kind of a poster, you can print it out in really big formats, and you go through these 9 blocks, starting from key partners. What partners do you have? Circular economy is always a game that's played with partners. You cannot do it alone. So key partners, key partnerships are really important for circular economy. Key resources, the resources are really important. They're there. The value proposition, this is just a fancy name for the product or service that you're delivering to the client. You try to describe it here. And then, of course, the customer segments and what relationships you have to the customer. So how are you going, for example, to get the product back from the customer once they don't want to use it anymore? And then, of course, you have the cost structure, so bottom line and revenue streams, sales, top line, also there. But this is really cool. So if you want to try out a business model, if you think, for example, about doing something on your own, or you're working in a company, you're talking about new business models. If you try to define a new business model in this canvas. This is really will help you in order to find out, does it make sense? Are there blind spots? Is there anything we didn't see before? Do we have the right partners? Does it make sense to get the product back because the resources are so valuable, and so on. So this can be really helpful. And I also put you the source here, so the links down there, they should be working. You can look it all up. There's a lot of documentation about it. Green operations, now it becomes more tangible for the operations guys. If we look at the production machine, can be for ICs, for example, wafers, whatever. How can it be more green? How can it become more green? What aspects do we see? First of all, I already said it, try to put in as few critical materials as possible. If we can minimize on the resources that we need for production, then this is already a big leap. Typically, for example, for IC manufacturing, you need a lot of chemicals. Maybe it's cool to use those chemicals twice, 3 times more often than today. Maybe it's possible to reduce the amount of chemicals. Maybe it's possible to clean the chemicals after use. Lots of different approaches. Also here in Austria, the companies are doing a great job actually, but there is always more that we can do. Energy efficiency, of course. This is a big thing. Many companies already think that they are so far ahead, and then when you look at the figures, they are not. Energy efficiency is really big. Sustainable use of water, for us here in Austria, it's not a big deal, but for other companies, other countries, it really is, because they don't have so much water, and they have to use it wise. Who of you knows what a digital twin is? You can simulate operations, you can change parameters and search for the results and try to find out what's happening in the plant, right? This can be really cool. When I was studying like 20 years ago, everybody was talking about digital twins and nobody knew what to do with it. I think nowadays this really has changed. So there is really a big market for that. And that can also help in increasing the sustainability of operations, because you know beforehand, if I change that parameter, what will change during operations, how will my sustainability be improved. And of course, the separation of waste. This sounds so easy. I was in a Teams call this week with some Americans from one customer, and they told me, well, it's so difficult to separate the waste correctly. Then I asked them, why is that the case? And they said, well, we have all black bins, and we try to write on the bins what should go in the bin, but they're all black, and it's so difficult for the people. And then we said, well, what about color coding, like red bins, yellow bins, green bins, black bins, whatever? And they were simply stunned, because they never heard about like color coding the waste bins. Yeah? In Austria, this is standard. In many other countries in Europe, this is standard. In other countries, in other continents, nobody cared about it for a long time, and nobody is still caring today. So when I talk about separation of waste, it can be as easy as that. It can also be a little more elaborate. For example, when we're talking about production machines, manufacturing machines, where we get several waste streams out of it. For example, like one waste stream of plastics, one waste stream of aluminium, one more waste stream. Some companies collect everything in one container. And then it's very difficult, or at least it's not effortless, to sort it again and have, in the end, pure waste streams from plastic, aluminium, and whatever. This is a really good idea to separate waste as early as possible. When it is possible, try to separate it immediately. Sounds very simple, it's very hard to do for some companies. When we have that, we're one step closer again to this circular operation. So then we're really close to being a very, very sustainable company. And then we have one last bit, because now this is purely internal. We are going external to our suppliers. We're looking at the supply chain, at the value chain again. Typically, when we complete our production, this is also where the supply chain typically ended in the last decades. So you put in some raw materials into the manufacturing, you get out a product. When the product is there, you don't have to put in any materials anymore. It's just completed. And this will change a little bit, because once we produce products that can be easily repaired, that can be repaired by customers, for example, or that can be treated after end of life so they can be easily recycled, we also need a certain supply chain for these steps. As I said, the legacy or the enhanced legacy approach was use secondary raw materials in the production. Then we're already kind of a little bit sustainable because it's secondary raw material. Try to use sustainable suppliers. And very important, the logistics. But in future, it's really important, and this is very, very, very important for such delicate things as, for example, smartphones or any electronic tool, equipment, appliance. It's very difficult to manufacture. But the failure modes and the failure points are pretty much the same, I think. They're relatively easy to understand. They're relatively easy to find out. They're relatively easy to cater with. And we have to fix, like, I would say, 80% of the classic failure points of such an equipment. And if that fixing can be done easily by the user, by a certain very easy to obtain services, then it's easy to keep the product as long in service as possible. Otherwise, and that's a big thing, I will come to the logistics now. Here I said, or written here, optimize logistics. Why is that important? Logistics, if you look at logistics purely from a sustainability standpoint, logistics often produce between 20 and 50% of emissions related to one product. It depends on the product, but logistics are a biggie with terms of emissions. Now today it's clear that we're going to optimize logistics whenever we can, because lots of emissions, lots of costs, we try to optimize it. In the future, when the company wants to get back a phone for repair or for refurbishment and reselling, this will cost the company money, because they will have to transport the thing from the customer back to the company and then again out to the next customer. So logistics is really a big thing, and that's also the reason why many circular economy initiatives fail from the beginning, because the logistic effort is simply too high. It doesn't make sense to, for example, let's stay with the traffic light. It doesn't make sense to ship traffic lights made from plastic around the globe to bring them back to the manufacturer, because the CO2 emissions will be too big and it's simply not worth it. And that's why the supply chain should become a supply circle in the end. So this is just the nomenclature here. The supply circle, this should be as closed as possible. We want to have really one path from the company to the client and back to the company. And once this supply circle is closed, then we are in a circular industry. But that's, as I said, relatively difficult in some aspects, because it may be, for example, too expensive. This was now the really big picture strategic overview. Now we're coming to the 9R strategies, which are more practical. Do you have any questions so far? 9 R strategies, which is funny because there are actually 10. In our linear economy, we're starting with the design, we're going to production, and then we sell it, use it, end of life, smartphone drops, is dead, and is going to the waste disposal company. Saubermacher picks it up. Actually, when we look at this economy from a waste standpoint, then we have the EU waste hierarchy, which is interesting because it says, first of all, we should prevent producing waste. This is the most important aspect, the most important goal. We should prevent producing waste. If it's not possible to prevent it, then at least we should prepare it for reuse. So we should make this thing repairable. So if this is broken, let's change one component and then it's working again. If that's not possible, let's recycle it. So this thingy will be shredded and separated into pieces, and then those individual materials coming out of it will be recycled. If that's not possible, those components will be recovered. Recovered, what does it mean? Recovered is very positive. It says you will burn it for thermal or electric energy. And if that's not possible because it's too dangerous or it's too difficult, then we just put it into landfill. This is the idea behind the EU waste hierarchy. The circular economy looks at it from a different perspective. We have 10 strategies, and this is why we had the strategy lecture before. We have 10 strategies or recipes, approaches that we can use to make our products more sustainable. And these are really cool. I will go quickly through them because we have a very practical part. We have refuse. We refuse to use certain materials. We rethink the business model, for example, not selling it anymore, but renting it out or pay per use, whatever. We reduce the use of certain materials, reduce energy, reduce water. We make the reuse of the product feasible and meaningful. We make the product repairable. We refurbish old products, such as Apple did with their iPhones, or still does. We remanufacture new iPhones, for example, from old chipsets, or we repurpose old products and use them in a different way. And then, of course, recycling, getting out secondary raw materials, and recover. This is actually recover energy from incineration. Quick examples, what do you think is that? We just don't provide the charger anymore with the iPhone or with any smartphone. Reduce. We reduce the amount of resources going into the product while still maintaining the product as it is, more or less. Yeah, but the original idea was exactly to reduce the amount of packaging that was transported, because they knew, okay, they would sell like, I don't know, 1,000 phones and only 100 chargers, for example. So they did not sell like those 900 chargers. And this is also what turned out on Apple's side, because it was obvious from the beginning that only very few people would buy actual Apple chargers, but most of them bought anything else, like Chinese brands. But this could be cool. So this is really something, when you reduce it to the bare bones, this could make sense. I'm not saying it always does make sense, but it could make. Now let's look at it, next perspective, if we reduce the plastic packaging, or there is no plastic packaging at all. What is that? We refuse to use plastic packaging, right? And this can really be an initiative. Next thing, we've already been talking about that. It's free, but you pay a rental fee, for example, per gigabyte. Rethink, so we rethink the business model. We make it more robust. This could bias into a reuse model because it can be reused after dropping. We provide tools and videos to enable easy change of components, repair. This is actually putting forth by the European Union as well, especially for battery changes. This is a cool idea. If you use an old chipset, I don't know if this really makes sense, but in my opinion, it could make sense. If you use old chipsets in new handsets, this is remanufacturing. This is already done in the car industry, so certain components in cars are really used so that the old components are refurbished and then put into new cars, which makes sense because they're otherwise too expensive to manufacture. This one is refurbishment. I think nobody knows that anymore, but in my age we had a lot of spider apps on our phones. If we use an old desk as a workbench, for example, this could be a repurpose initiative. And finally, if we separate all those different items in the right waste bin and prepare it for the correct treatment, then we go into the recycling. Or we just burn it up and recover energy out of it. That was the quick part. Now let's go into the last part. Are there any questions so far? Now this was very quickly, but I think you got the point out of those 10 9R strategies. Because many companies are talking about these and they're kinda handy, kinda nice to explain. I looked at the electronics industry a little bit and tried to find some examples of what companies do in order to improve their sustainability. What is the company ASML? Who knows the company ASML? They really thought of how can they improve the sustainability. And if we look at ASML, they refer to midstream. So from a strategic point of view, again, we have upstream. Upstream is typically where do the resources come from, and downstream, this is towards the customer, and then end-of-life waste. ASML is somewhere in the midstream. This is the production manufacturing part. And they tried to come up with different initiatives and propose them. My understanding is to the electronics industry, right? So they're the machine producers, and they want to give those examples that they come up with to the industry in order the industry applies them and make the industry more sustainable as a whole. This is my understanding. And what is really cool, if such a company does it on such a big level, then it's really producing some impact. And this is one thing that really stood out to me. If they pull this off in a good way and they make other companies follow their ideas and use their ideas in the production process, then this will have a big impact in the end. And what's cool about it is they don't only think about the resources that are going into their machines, but they also think about the customers. They think, for example, if a customer has some chipset and they don't use it anymore, they could, for example, return it as part of the As New program. So this is really the classical chip reuse value chain. But they have the customers in mind, and they are not even producing the chips for the customers. But this is, so from my perspective, from a strategic point of view, this is really, really cool. Because typically, who should be thinking about the customers? Apple should be thinking about the customers. maybe the people who produce the chipsets can be thinking about the customers, but much lesser than Apple, for example, or Samsung. But ASML goes that step and says, okay, now we are thinking about what are the customers doing with the chips that are produced by our clients. And this is really just a great example. What are they are achieving? They achieved in 2023 a reuse rate of 88%, which is huge, I think, and the recycling rate with their machines of 55%. So this is, you can look up all the details on the internet, of course. This is just the big picture, but this is really something cool. So it's a company who is not directly involved in customer activities, but they are thinking ahead, and they're taking really a big step in improving and enabling their customers, so the whole industry gets more sustainable. Next one. Who is TSMC? The cool thing is, already in 2019, they had a recycling rate of 96%. So when and they are in Taiwan, so this is China practically, but no, but from the global geography, they're having far less legal pressure than, for example, we have in the European Union. They should be having far less pressure to reach a high recycling rate. They are a bit, or they are ahead in most instances from the rest of Asia Pacific, but the differences from legal perspective are not that much. And still they had a recycling rate of 96% in 2019. So this is really something very impressive. And although, if you remember the map in the beginning with all the resources distributed over our planet, although a lot of those resources can be found in Asia Pacific, already back in 2019 they tried to recycle as much as possible, because they knew that this was the only sustainable way they can do business. And this is, again, this is really something that's cool, because it took them a lot of time to achieve that. They didn't start in 2018 and said, we want to do this next year. Probably they started in 2012 or maybe 2015, yeah? So 10 years ago or even more. And this is really cool. So this should be a certain message for our companies here in Europe. Those people did it. Infineon and Villach. Who knows what Infineon is using hydrogen for in their manufacturing process? Well, apparently they use hydrogen for certain production steps, but not for each product that they're producing, and that's the point. The idea was, like 4 or 5 years from now, the idea was to use this hydrogen for public transport between Infineon and Villach, and also in the greater Villach area. Because Infineon apparently was using a lot of hydrogen, and they said, okay, we can clean the hydrogen that we're using, and then you can use this hydrogen for public transport. And what they did, in 2021, they started the project, and from 2022 on, they provided cleaned hydrogen to the public transport system. And it was the plan to produce, to operate, I think, about 40 buses in the greater Villach area. This year, the project was stopped. What do you think was the reason? Because the production process changed, the product changed, and they didn't use so much hydrogen anymore. Therefore, there was no hydrogen available for public transport, and they had to go with normal buses again. What does this tell us? It tells us we really have to look into the details. When we have in our company this year a lot of hydrogen and next year also maybe a lot of hydrogen, if we're building such a model, we have to be sure that this is sustainable in terms that we can sustain this model for long term. If it's just momentarily, well, then it's per se not sustainable.
It's a good advert, though.
Yes, it was really cool in 2021 and 22. It looked cool. I think it worked cool. It was really cool stuff. But nowadays they don't produce so much hydrogen anymore, and that's it. Yes, please. So they used it once, then they cleaned it. They couldn't have used it for production again, but it was okay for the buses. And there was also a plan to use renewable energy in order to produce actually hydrogen on site, but this actually didn't play out as well. And there is also one sentence, there is also one example in Tyrol, Empreis, I don't know who is from Western Austria. Empreis is a big bakery actually initially, and they changed a lot towards hydrogen production, and also using the heat from hydrogen production in their bakery, for example, and using the hydrogen in their truck fleet and so on. And also they are seeing financial troubles at the moment. Please. I'm just talking here about the fact that it obviously didn't pay out, yeah. And this is one of the big stories of the hydrogen industry here in Europe. There are many initiatives, for example, the hydrogen valleys in Germany as well. None of these models pays out, yeah, in the long term. They're good ideas, but after all, there is some bit and piece missing, and something doesn't work, yeah. This is the story of the hydrogen life here in Europe, unfortunately. There are some areas, for example, in California, there are a lot of hydrogen vehicles running, and they're doing a good job, and so people are happy with them. They're preferred over electric vehicles, but you need the right boundary conditions. And obviously something doesn't work here in Europe. Example of Saubermacher in recycling electric components. You already know this picture, right? This is really the first part of how we are recycling electric components, electric products, and electronic products. First of all, we have to get out the battery, and we try to get out most of the big electronic components, because then we don't have to separate them later. Then typically this shredder, this is really huge. This is like a car, and this shredder is used to crush this thing into pieces, or what's left of this thing from the first step into pieces, in order to make small bits that can be then treated afterwards. Sometimes it depends on the equipment. Sometimes we will mill it down even to smaller pieces, like 1 millimeter or even powder, and then separate powder, because if you have, for example, plastic powder, copper powder, gold powder, circuit board powder, you can separate it relatively easy. But if you have mixed components, so for example, still gold-plated circuit boards, for example, it's more difficult. And then the last bit is sorting. Sorting is really where the let's say where the engineering science in recycling is happening. The first two steps, they're really brutal. Sorting, this is the cool stuff. We try to find out, for example, according to the color or according to material properties, where to put what. 5% actual, so these are current figures. 5% of the overall volume goes to landfill or to incineration because it's dangerous. For example, sometimes batteries, damaged batteries, for example, or chemicals, whatever. 10% go to thermal treatment, so this means they're used to produce energy, and 85% really is going to material recycling, so plastics for new plastics, for example. Battery recycling is a little bit different. Battery recycling, we also try to sort everything in the end, but we have to do a lot manually. First of all, we have to discharge every battery because charged batteries are still dangerous. Then we disassemble all the batteries. So, for example, if you have the big car modules, they are disassembled. We get all the cells out. We get all the materials separated. We get out the battery management system because, for example, there are companies who are repairing bike batteries, and if they have no contract with the bike manufacturer, they are not able to obtain battery management systems from the manufacturer, so they need some sources for that. So, for example, they can get those battery management systems from us. Then we treat those batteries thermally in order to, for example, burn certain amounts of plastic, foil, and all the good stuff comes again into a shredder, and then we sort Fe metals, so iron metals, non-metallic or non-magnetic metals, copper, lithium, for example. Recycling rate is not that high because it's a rough process. It's a brutal process. We have around 70% of recycling rate, and of those precious metals collected here in the end, we have about 50% recycled. That was it so far for this lecture.